szykować się do początku.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Mayors, deputy mayors, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Warsaw Pact of Free Cities Reshaping Democracy Conference. My name is David Korani, and I'm here in a dual capacity for the sake of efficiency. I am here in my capacity as Pact of Free Cities Special Envoy of the city of Budapest, and I had the privilege to be part of the Pact journey since its inception. And then I'm also here as president of what we call Action for Democracy, which is a US foundation grantmaker that is actively looking into possibilities to support the democratic ecosystem here in Poland. It is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you at this afternoon's conference. First and foremost, let me thank Mayor Trzaskowski and his able team for working tirelessly and bringing us together at this very opportune moment. It's an especially critical moment for Polish democracy, as evidenced by the march yesterday. Before I turn it over to the mayor to formally welcome this esteemed gathering, and my dear friend and colleague Cathryn Cluever Ashbrook from the Bertelsmann Foundation to moderate the first two sessions, let me just give you a very quick primer on the Pact of Free Cities and how we got here today. The year is 2019, and the four mayors of the Visegrad four capitals, Budapest, Bratislava, Warsaw, and Prague, who at the time were fortunate enough never to hear the word COVID yet, got together to launch an initiative to protect democracy and freedom in their cities and countries. The pact was born as an answer to the scourge of nationalist populism and has been hijacking the political landscape in many countries in the region and beyond. Despite coming from different political families, the four mayors decided to take a resolute stand together, quote, acting as islands of freedom and democracy in the illiberal storm engulfing Central and Eastern Europe, as The Guardian put at the time. A lot has happened since then. In just 4 years, the pact has become an informal but impactful network to act as a bulwark against democratic erosion and standing up for democratic champions. From the protesters for democracy in Belarus through embattled mayors in Turkey to besieged cities in Ukraine, the pact has stood by those on the front lines of defending the values of freedom and democracy. The pact has also expanded and developed a robust presence on the international stage. At the first expanded Pact Summit in Budapest in 2021, the Pact already welcomed 21 mayors to join the alliance, transcending the regional nature of the Pact. At the second Prague Summit in 2022, the network welcomed yet additional members. And now at the third Warsaw Summit, we are thrilled to reach 36 members, with Berlin, Milan, and Lviv officially joining. We very much look forward to the fourth one, hosted by Mayor Vallo and Bratislava next year. Built on the widening membership, the Pact has also influenced the European and global agenda. The Pact has been very actively lobbying for better access of EU funds for cities, with some tangible results already. The four founding mayors participated in a US congressional hearing and worked together with members of the US Congress, contributing to the creation of the first ever special envoy for subnational diplomacy position at the State Department. And the Pact really sparked a global movement of cities standing up for democratic principles. At the US Summit for Democracy 2023, hosted by President Biden, the Pact of Free Cities, together with the Global Parliament of Mayors, GMF Cities, presented the Global Declaration of Mayors for Democracy that is built entirely on the foundations and the text of the Pact. By now, that declaration has more than 250 signatories from 50 countries on 5 continents, and it keeps growing. Russia's brutal war against Ukraine opened up a new chapter in the Pact's life. The heroic stance of Ukrainian citizens and their mayors have added to the urgent mission of the Pact's remit. And as the wave of refugees started to test cities' capabilities in the region, the Pact convened here in Warsaw for a crisis summit and pledged to provide humanitarian assistance and help rebuild Ukraine. And today we are very fortunate to welcome a delegation of mayors from Ukraine, from Mariupol, from Kharkiv, from Bucza, from Konotop, with the mayors of Odessa and Kyiv joining us online to explore what the Pact can do to better support humanitarian efforts and the reconstruction of Ukraine. Please give them a very warm round of applause. And last but not least, Quo Vadis Pact of Free Cities. Where is the Pact headed in the future? I'm happy to report that this morning's summit featured a very productive conversation on the next phase, on where a Pact should focus its energies, where and through what actionable projects it can have the most impact. And to brief you on the outcomes of that, and of course formally welcome you, I am now pleased to turn to Mayor Trzaskowski. Rafał, the floor is yours.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Warsaw, dear eminent guests from all across Europe. My very special words of welcome are due to mayors coming from Lviv, Bucza, Kyiv, KEYNOTE, and we continue to lend support to you as much as we can, and we will support you as long as it takes. I'm very happy that Andrij, Sadowy, the champion of Unbroken project, is with us and attracts even more support from other European cities. The aim of the project is to build a rehabilitation center for all war victims. We were also assisting Kharkov and KEYNOTE, giving them transportation infrastructure such as buses and tramways. Sometimes these were life-saving measures. Together with the mayor of Gdańsk, we also decided to lend a hand in reconstruction of Mariupol. And this is the partners' twin city of Gdańsk. From the Warsaw perspective, we are also aware of all the massive destruction perpetrated by the Russians, wiped off by the Russians. We know it all too well because this was once the history of Warsaw as well. Warsaw that got resurrected after massive destruction. I'm very happy to be hosting you here in Warsaw on this very particular day. Mind you, the 4th of June 1989 was a very important and momentous occasion where first semi-free elections were organized, which ended this gloomy chapter of communism. And this is how it all started. It all started with a Polish solidarity and then semi-free elections of 1989. So the 4th of June comes as a very special date to all of us. Yesterday we took to the streets of Warsaw. More than 500,000 of attendants demonstrated their attachment to democracy, and many of you guests present here in this room appreciated this attachment to democracy and civil society. In answering questions asked by many journalists worldwide, I often reiterate that democracy in Poland is strong because NGOs, because civil society, because independent media in this country continue to be strong. Also strong by the strength of the opposition. This was visible very clearly yesterday. On the anniversary of the elections of 1989, we remember that without the developments of 1989, there would be no freedom in the region. It is very important that yesterday the rally was also attended by Lech Walesa, who epitomizes all the changes in Poland and in this part of Europe. While initiating Pact of Free Cities together with the friends from Budapest, Bratislava and Prague, we thought that we should give a very clear signal that it is not all only about governments, that Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia and Poland also have free societies, open-minded societies, and the smiling democratic face of our societies can be shown and showcased to the world. It turned out that there are many like-minded people who also worldwide who would also like to support democracy by especially supporting grassroots democracy and initiatives. So that's why we have almost 40 cities united in the Pact of Free Cities, and my friends from Lviv, Andrij, Sadowy, from Milan, have acceded the pact and signed the membership declaration. So it is very important to welcome in this fold new cities and to reaffirm the values we stand for. The pact is growing, it is sending a signal how important the strengthening of local democracies is, but importantly, this is also a very important building block of promoting democracy worldwide. We have been on an online session with the US Congress Committee. The purpose of the session was to evaluate the status of and the condition of democracy in Poland. And we have in mind that President Biden really supports the idea of supporting local democracies from the grassroots level. So this largely overlaps with the agenda of the US administration. What is even more important is that this initiative proves to be resonant all across the world. If we want to fight populism, we must strengthen local democracy, strengthen cities, to usher in further changes which will not be possible unless they are supported on a grassroots level. If we want to fight climate change, if we want to promote new changes, making our economies more innovative and more digitized, this cannot be achieved without cities. 18% of GDP is created by Warsaw, the hub for many startups and innovative industries. This is also true for other cities and towns, which are the driving force of local economies, but also attachment to democracy in such urban communities is very important. We have consultations, social dialogue, we have participatory budgets, and this all is the feature of local democracy, important as it is. Today we are going to talk about very pragmatic things, what to do to make this pact more than just a symbol and more than the platform for exchanging of experiences, especially in priority areas for the European Union and for the whole modern world. Number one at present is assistance provided to our Ukrainian friends. That's why we warmly welcome our Ukrainian friends in this fold. Vitali, Klitschko could not make it from Kyiv because of the Russian shelling, but there will be online attendance also from the Mayor of Odessa, and assistance to Ukraine is one of our top priorities, something we will continue to do as long as it takes. As we were dispatching the first transportation to Kyiv, well, the Polish government was not ready with any assistance, and we, in cooperation with the Ukrainian railways, managed to dispatch first loads of assistance, asking Mayor Klitschko what is most needed. And people were asking us, how come that you reacted so quickly, and all those parcels were labeled as the one destined to the local government in Kyiv. and I was often asked if we were not frightened that those cargoes, this assistance might be misappropriated or stolen. But then who would have the courage to confront Vitali Klitschko eye to eye? And assistance provided to all civil organizations and civil society too in Belarus is another priority that features importantly on our agenda. We also want to fight together with climate warming. That's why we were standing for direct funding of municipal budgets from the European Union. Mind you, many funds have not been disbursed by the European Union because of irresponsible policies pursued by the governments. But why should municipal citizens pay the price for irresponsibility of their governments? Some few years ago, our idea of direct disbursement of funds was dismissed as highly improbable. At present, however, the climate in the European Union is by far more friendly. We have more than 100 green cities. We lobby effectively for municipal budgets. We also help to streamline the assistance to Ukraine via our good services. And we also want to list a number of recommendations for cities in partnership with the University of Columbia. We want to have toolbox for defending democracy next to the new signatories of our pact, something that we inaugurated today. What is very important and what speaks volumes is that we have mayors of Milan, Berlin and Lviv in our fold to talk about very detailed and practical things. The pact is live and kicking, it operates full steam, and as much as yesterday the Polish society demonstrated their attachment to democracy, as much we will also continue in the same vein within our pact. I look forward to the next summit in Bratislava under the stewardship of Matúš Vallo, and in the meantime we'll do what we can to strengthen local democracies. Thank you very much, and let us embark on the concrete debate.
You are all the way over here. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Mayor Trzaskowski, first of all, for having all of us here, and I think for your vital remarks just now, which we will pick up on in our first panel discussion. I'm Cathryn Cluever Ashbrook. I'm Senior Advisor with the Bertelsmann Foundation, and I know many of the people in this audience because I've had the great pleasure of working on cities and urban diplomacy from the perspective of international relations since I stepped out of City Hall in New York City when I served the second Bloomberg administration in 2009 and continued that work at the Harvard Kennedy School at the Future of Diplomacy Project, which I ran there, and have since been able to keep that conversation going in precisely helping to build for the US State Department, first a task force on city and state and subnational government, and now a full office. So I'm very grateful to be here and lend my support to the future of the Pact and all the plans that you have together, and to help facilitate the conversations we'll have this afternoon. We want to, of course, look at how cities, very pragmatically, the mayor just mentioned it, strengthen the values of freedom, human dignity, rule of law, social justice, cultural diversity, all the things that live qua nature of our cities in the way that we work, collaborate, and share space together. But when Vladimir Putin attacked a free and sovereign Ukraine in February of 2022, he set out to uproot, degrade, deracinate, and erase Ukrainian civilization from its own understanding of memory, self, history, and our own collective memory in the most barbaric way. Over a course of a year and a half of this war, we've witnessed the violation of every 1945 post-war principle that we put in place to do exactly what we intended to do as humanity, which is to protect our civilian populations. We've seen the violations of the Hague Convention principles on protecting the buildings, the architecture of our joint civilization and our humanity, damaging our cultural heritage and the memory and the roots of our joint civilization. But of course, brave Ukrainians continue to fight with grit and resilience and commitment to peace and democracy, which is now the envy of the world. They did so through the kidnapping of mayors and through the renaming of their own cities. So cities who have represented since the dawn of time the places in which our cultures take root and grow, including the culture of democracy, direct participation. They've come to the aid of their Ukrainian brethren, and they've tried to help them in expanding the capacity for direct democracy. And that is precisely what we want to talk about this early afternoon, how it's done, how it's helped, what is needed. And I am so pleased to welcome to this stage, virtually, the mayor of Kyiv, Vitali Klitschko on the line, thank you. And now the mayor of Budapest, Gergely, please come and join us on stage, and the mayor of Lviv, Mr. Sadowy. Please come and join us on stage. We will have some translation for some of our statements, so please, if you need translation, make sure you have your little translation device handy. Because we're broadcasting pretty much everywhere, I do want to introduce my esteemed panel to you a little bit, starting, of course, with our host, Rafał Trzaskowski, first elected mayor in 2018. After a vivid time in national and European politics, I think we can say that. He was the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. He was the Vice Chairman of the EU Committee. He had a very outspoken role in Brussels. And then he was the Minister of Administration and Digitization, responsible for the digitization of the entire country, specifically giving people access where there is no access. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. He's a big champion for the next generation, continuing to bring up and politicize young people in the spirit of democracy. And we thank you for that as well, serving in Anatolii and other places. Next, I want to go to Mayor Klitschko, who's joining us from Ukraine. All of us will understand the enormous pressures that he's been under. The shelling on the Ukrainian capital has been merciless over these last few weeks, and our hearts and minds are with you, Mayor Klitschko. Thank you for being here. You too, of course, have had now a long career in urban, but also in national politics, and have been effectively the mayor now, elected first as chairman of the UDAR party in 2010, and then now have been serving in the most latest count in a full term since 2015. And with your brother have been running the Klitschko Foundation, which has been so vital in delivering humanitarian aid on the ground, of course, in Kyiv, but far beyond. And you have been, I think, for many, truly a beacon of hope in this very, very difficult time. And we are pleased that you are making time for us at this challenging moment. To my left is the mayor of Lviv, Andrij Sadowy, elected to his fourth term in 2020, previously chairman of the radio TV firm Lux, and founder of the NGO Self-Reliance, Samopomich, which became a political party in Ukraine. We heard that he's been part of the Ukrainian-Polish Unification Council and been active in city development for a number of decades. Thank you for being here as well, all the way from Lviv. And finally, but certainly not last but certainly not least, one of the co-founders of the Pact of Free Cities, the mayor of Budapest, Gergely Karácsony, of course, a Hungarian politician, political scientist, mayor of Budapest since 2019, also a distinguished career in national service and national government from 2010 to 2014. Won his mayoral election originally with 50% of the votes, historic achievement for a Green politician in Hungary. I want to dive right in, and precisely because we have seen these incredibly moving pictures yesterday here on the streets of Poland, when we know science tells us, Freedom House tells us, the Economist Intelligence Unit tells us that in fact democracy is backsliding almost everywhere. Only 8% of the countries now in the world would be considered pure democracies. And 35 countries go to a ballot box next year to make a decision on whether or not they will stay in the democratic vein or move in a different direction. Freedom House, interestingly, this year has sort of course-corrected to say, well, we're at a stagnant point for democracy, but we're certainly not advancing. So it may be an opportunity now to push forward really with the narrative and the fundamental anchoring again of democracy. And I think cities are really and truly the root of making the case for pragmatic direct services and for interactions with their citizens. I want to go first to the mayor of Kyiv and ask you, Mr. Mayor, when a conflict evolves, and as conflicts evolve, and we have seen this all over the world, not least and most recently in the discussions around how you get resilience in places like Colombia, peace is the fundamental aspect of resilience, finding a way to carry peace forward as a conflict is still hot, but then as a conflict moves into a next stage. What is the role of cities in promoting democratic engagement in a moment of crisis, when there's martial law around, when decisions need to be made quickly, they need to be made often from a central entity? What role does that give urban democracy, does that give cities in this moment of severe crisis? And why is that so vital now?
Good afternoon, dear friends. Great to see you. Actually, Kyiv enjoy the Pact of Free Cities. It's very important for us because we're fighting right now for free city. We're fighting right now for free country. And I want to say thank you very much for invitation, Rafał Trzaskowski. I give you a call. I want to be together with you, but last week was a hard week for our citizens. Every night we listen a lot of this explosion, and a lot of buildings was destroyed. More than 20 people was injured and 2 people killed. Right now, actually killed more than 170 citizens, civilians in our hometown. Last week killed the girl. Its girl was child number 7 from Russian rockets, missiles, and kamikaze drone. And that's why my citizens not understand if so critical situation. I leave the city, and I hope it's everyone understand. I have to stay in my hometown. Great to have online chance to talk to you. First of all, everyone have to understand we right now democracy is defend from authoritarianism and populism, and it's great everybody united around the Pact of Free Cities in Europe. It's actually our strong position, and we discuss about that. We have to make a strategy. First point. Second point, we actually fighting right now for our future, for our democracy, and we don't want back to USSR. We see our future as part of European family, and the former Soviet bloc, the countries like Poland, Hungary, Slovenia, Slovakia, Czech Republic is a great example to make tremendous progress right now and make great services, and the country's democratic, the part of European family where main values are human rights. We're fighting for that, and we're fighting for our homes, for our families, for our future of our country. And right now, it's very important self-government. It's very important democracy. We, in this difficult period of time, we're fighting for that also. And it's very important assistance from every one of you, because we listen a lot. First point, very important, to stop this war, to win this war. And second point, to rebuild the country. What does it mean rebuild the country? Rebuild the country, it's not rebuild the buildings, road or bridges. Rebuild the country, it means new rule of law, reform, constitution reform. We need court reform. We need anti-corruption reform. We need also self-government reform, because we actually, one of them very successful reforms was the decentralization, and we have to continue that. And we need you assistant, to help to rebuild the country. Rebuild the country is mean rebuild and implement reform to make country European country. And actually we enjoy as capital of Ukraine Pact of Free Cities, ready to work together, support each other and fighting for freedom and democracy. It's very important point for us to stop the war and build democratic European country. And we need your assistance. And thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who support Ukraine, who help for our refugees, who give to us humanitarian aid, who sent to us a lot of stuff. By the way, thank you very much for subway wagons, what we received from Warsaw. It's very important, critical important for us. Our success is the best answer for our friends who support us, and our success, political success, the success in battlefield, and success in the economy of our country is the best answer for our enemies, to Russia. And that's why very important to be successful. It's very important to be together, and it's very important to be part of free war as democratic European city. We're fighting for that. We're fighting for our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Klitschko. That deserves not only a round of applause, but exactly what the mayor asks for is our continued support, our continued attention, and the definition of support that has all the facets, I think, that you have just named. I want to turn to the mayor of Lviv. Lviv has had such a vital role in this conflict because it has welcomed so many internally displaced people. It has become the safe haven for so many Ukrainians who had to leave their cities once they became uninhabitable because of the barbaric campaign run by the Russian Federation. And I want you to reflect just specifically on what that does to your city democracy, to how you hang together, what you do for one another, how you are able to incorporate so many of your fellow countrymen in the cities and help make joint decisions for them. Because if one thing is clear about cities, cities are pragmatic problem solvers. They're not political, they need to get things done. And inasmuch as you have been able to do that, we would be interested in hearing.
Thank you for the question. I told today, during a Russian invasion, Lviv hosted a lot of internally displaced people. 5 million IDPs passed through Lviv during Russian invasion. We had days when Lviv hosted 2 million IDPs. All families in my city hosted guests. My family hosted family from Zaporizhzhia. Huge problem for us, a lot of wounded. Mm-hmm. Only our municipal hospital hosted 30,000 wounded, civilian wounded, children, women, elderly people, Ukrainian soldiers. I am not doctor, I am mayor, but I must think about good quality surgery, mm-hmm. about temporary, permanent prosthetics, about psychological, physical, social rehabilitation. I must think about future. It is not easy, but I must. It is my duty today. But we must think about future. But before, I tell you a short story, but I speak Ukrainian, okay?
When the Russians assaulted after Kramatorsk during the evacuation, there was this family, Stepanenko, Eliza, 11, Yana, 11, and the mother. Yana lost 2 legs. Mom, the mother, lost 1 leg, and they were in Lviv. They received treatment, and they were getting ready to receiving prosthetics. And then we sent them to the US. When I talked to Yana, 12 years old actually, beautiful girl, I understood as a father, and I am a father of 5, I understood that I should start thinking about her future. And I had a conversation with her last week. She has beautiful prosthetics already. She's still in the US, but she's going to be reunited with us soon. When I finished the first conversation with her, I went aside and I started crying. I couldn't stop. It's not the sort of wound that is going to be healed very soon. It's the sort of wound that lasts forever, your entire life. That's why we want to have a large manufacturing plant of prosthetics, because as many as 20,000 people need prosthetics and rehabilitation associated with it. When the war started, within 1 day only, our hospital received 100 injured. It's difficult to grasp the scale of it all, but we are managing. Because we are a free city, we are a democratic city. And here I would like to answer one of the questions about democracy versus totalitarian regime. Which is going to have an upper hand? Well, the totalitarian regime may be far more powerful, but in a totalitarian regime, decisions are orders, and orders are enforced. And in democracy, all the parts of the body are in combat. All the Ukrainians are engaged in the battle. And when people are saying that the Ukrainian army is 500,000 and the Russian army is far more powerful, let me tell you that the Ukrainian army is 40 million Ukrainian citizens, and we will be fighting for the last drop of blood because we are fighting for our freedom. And when you lose your freedom, you begin to understand how valuable it is, like air. It's there, taken for granted, but then it disappears. That's why free cities inherently are about freedom. This is why our collaborations are pivotal. And I invite all the mayors present here, do join us, do visit us in Lviv and see for yourself how we are managing. Mrs. Dulkiewicz has visited us, Rafał has visited us as well. And it's absolutely important. It's a long-distance work, if you like. It's easy to lose democracy very quickly. It's an easy process, if you like. Look at Russia. Look at how Russia kept losing it for 30 years, but it infected other countries, cultural communities, athletic communities, that it captured regions and parties of free democratic states, and that was a disaster. Ukraine put a halt to all that, and the world is at risk today, and the future of the world is also being decided in Ukraine. I thank Rafał for his initiative to create the pact. You must know that we will fight till the end.
We must together build our victory. Never give up. Only victory. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Sadowy. I think that is another important rallying cry. Democracy as necessary as air, the freedom to breathe. Mayor Karácsony, when the four of you joined the Pact, it was because you felt that you were being, in a way, encircled by a country that was increasingly illiberal, increasingly authoritarian. And I think we all, I mean, every piece of news that often comes out of central administration in Hungary shocks us. But when I read the news that Patriarch Kirill delivered the first degree of the Order of Glory and Honor from the Russian Orthodox Church to Viktor Orban, who accepted it, that seemed to be another building of bridges between authoritarian regimes. That seemed to be a new sort of signal and a new sort of weight. But you've been living in this environment for so long. You have been fighting for the freedom of all these values that both of our Ukrainian mayors have articulated when being squeezed by the outside. How has the Pact helped you in making the case and advancing strategies? We heard from Rafał a little bit about what you've done to push on the European level to think about independent resources. How has the Pact, this network, helped you in particular for Budapest?
Excuse me, I will speak in Hungarian. Én azt gondolom, hogy az nem véletlen, hogy pont a visegradi főpolgármester.
I think that this is not the work of coincidence that the mayors of V4, the Visegrad 4, started a pact in order to strengthen democracy. We are representatives of such nations that enjoyed the benefits of democracy for a short period of time after the war. On the one hand, we have deeply rooted democratic traditions in our countries, but on the other hand, at present, there are politicians at the helm who believe in ruling with iron fist. When I was elected the mayor of Budapest, I was by no means all alone. Also in other cities and towns, mayors representing opposition gained the upper hand and were chosen to the office. But it was obvious for me that I would need alliances and friends, especially from the countries who find themselves in a similar political situation. So this is not a coincidence. Upon my election, the first interview that I gave was to Gazeta Wyborcza of Poland. And back then I was saying that our capital cities should cooperate. And next day I had a phone call from Rafał. He said, "You have an excellent idea." And then in December, we started our pact. For us, this is the matter of to be or not to be. The work that we are doing together with our EU partners is very important and speaks volumes. And Hungarian citizens do fear about the condition of democracy in Hungary, and they see that they are not alone. Of course, the battle we are fighting cannot be easily compared to the battle that Ukraine is fighting. But day in, day out, I can see that there are forces of the good and the evil struggling also in my country. And I hope that the good will prevail. And I think that our brothers from Ukraine, even if they feel that they are supported, that someone is on their side, it must be very bracing for them. And sometimes our society needs to be cornered and pressed with the back against the wall in order to do something radical. However, there is an attachment to the European Union, and we are very active in the EU institutions, and by that we exert some pressure on the Hungarian government. The Hungarian government needs to consult us because the EU legislation so requires. If it was not the case, then in the next financial perspective, Hungary would get €0 for further development. If the Hungarian government was not forced to cooperate with us for the purposes of operational programs, would not pay a single penny. So democracy is under constant threat, is at risk, but every time there is such crisis, we manage to resurrect and to go further. The fact that Russia demonstrated its ugly face via the attack on Ukraine, well, it is now visible to everyone, and I think that the conclusion we can draw is what Putinism results in. So this is like an exclamation mark for the whole world.
You spoke very eloquently, I think, about this shift of power that Mayor Karácsony was talking about, and that's what it is. You mayors are reclaiming a sense of power, and in so doing are managing to open a different negotiation space for you in Brussels vis-a-vis your nation states, and are discovering levers in which you can push emboldened by what goes on in your cities. So I wonder if you can reflect a little bit on how important it is to bring Ukraine with you now to those negotiation tables in Brussels, and then what you hope very pragmatically from this push on democracy, as you work with cities around Europe. We heard that you're coming up with other forms of financing across the world. Leopoldo López in Venezuela turned assets of the Maduro regime into stable coin to pay his doctors in the middle of the pandemic. Lots of original ideas on how to shift power. What are yours, and what are the Pact's?
Well, yes. First of all, relations between local governments and cities and central governments are tense all around the world. Why? Because there is a bit of competition, because lots of power in democracy has been devolved towards local authorities, towards cities. And more importantly, it is impossible to deal with most of the challenges that are before us without involving the local government and without involving cities. And central governments are great at actually shifting responsibility to our shoulders. Just look at the previous few years. We are not, as a city, responsible for dealing with pandemics, yet most of the burden was shifted our way. We are not, as cities, supposed to deal with migration crises. These are competences of the central government, yet most of the responsibility with even registering refugees was shifted our way. We're not responsible for dealing with the energy crisis, yet the government in Poland was so unprofessional that they were unable even to distribute coal, and they shifted it to us. And that's what's happening all around the world. And of course, Poland or Hungary are a case in point when it comes to central governments which are turning into autocracies and which are trampling democracy. And as I've said on numerous occasions, democracy is strong because of the civil society. But look at Spain, look at Italy. Their relations between local governments are also, and the central government, are tense.
Yeah.
So now, if Ukraine wants to be really a successful democracy, it has to devolve power. It started doing it, but it needs to continue. And of course now the Ukrainian society is completely united in a fight against the crazy aggressor. But after the war is ended, and I hope it will be ended as soon as possible, then there is a question of the relations between the central government and the local government. And it is for the success of Ukraine, I would submit to you that it's absolutely crucial for the local government, regional government, to be as strong as possible, and for the cities to be as strong as possible. And I think that we, especially we in this part of Europe are the most credible in actually helping our friends attain that, because we have these experiences. Also when it comes to getting and using well the money from the European Union, also when it comes to creating a successful lobbying, also when it comes to meeting all of those priorities that are before us. And rebuilding Ukraine, because it has to be done with us, yet again. So that's why I think that this cooperation needs to be continued, because if Ukraine is to raise like the phoenix from ashes, it needs also our support. The support given by central government is absolutely crucial, because we cannot, give weapons to Ukraine. Right. We cannot give billions of euros to Ukraine. So this is absolutely, top priority. But then our support, I think, is also crucial, not only by providing subway equipments to Kyiv, or trams to KEYNOTE, or helping with Unbroken, but also sharing our know-how, especially when it comes to integrating Ukraine to the European Union. And the last sentence. The Balkans were promised membership in the European Union at Thessaloniki summit in 2003, 20 years ago. And you know how it's proceeded. I mean, not all the member states, the Western Balkan states, are even negotiating. Yeah. So, I mean, if the European Union, because of emotion, promised Ukraine membership, and if it's to be realized, in 2050, I mean, no one's going to wait for so long. So that means that we need to really make it happen. And you cannot make it happen if you do not have that support on the local level, and if you do not have a strong local government and strong cities. And look at those guys. I mean, we all love President Zelensky. I mean, he's like this epitome of a true hero, David against Goliath. But I mean, those are other heroes of Ukraine now, because they stand firm and they really help their citizens every day. The mayors of Kyiv, Lviv, KEYNOTE, Mariupol, and all the other cities that are here, Kharkiv, Odessa, and those who are not here. So that's why we need to keep helping them.
I see you nodding, Mayor Klitschko, and I want you to come in here very specifically, because I think Mayor Trzaskowski has said exactly that. He's pointed to this moment of danger, the moment of potential when violence starts ebbing. There's a moment of transition, and then cities will be called to the fore to really keep the societies together, to reinvest in their populations. And of course, all this work starts now. And I want you to give us a little more detail on what you said before. This whole point about democracy, the parts of democracy, figuring out how to restore a rule of law, redistribution. I mean, you have to put out literally all the fires in the city and make sure that basic functions still operate, and you're at war. So for this audience here, specifically on the democracy point, what is it you need, and how do you need to receive it now? Who needs to be doing what most effectively for you?
I give you some, thank you for your question. I give you some very interesting example. In Soviet Union, actually, I born in Soviet Union many years ago, and we doesn't have a civil society. The people don't have responsibility for his cities, for his villages. And right now, the situation is totally changed. The people understand it's their city. It's our hometown, and we are responsible for that. In beginning the war, it's actually civil society make very interesting movement. We, as mayor of Kyiv, mayors of city was responsible for civil defense. Can you imagine? And some part, women and children moved to mass safety part of Ukraine, to the west of Ukraine. And the second day of the war, I visiting and checked all points for civil defense. Some pictures, 2 o'clock in the morning, it's darkness, dark, no lights. It's freezing cold, wind is snowing, line, kilometers long, where men and women stay to be the part of civil defense. They take the ammunition, they take the weapons and
Looks like our line is frozen. Give it a couple seconds. Okay, can we get the mayor of Kyiv back on the line? I'm looking at our technical team here. Hopefully we'll be able to do a quick refresh. That was a very dramatic point on which to leave this conversation, unfortunately. Yeah, very much. We wanted to hear the resolution and particularly the support point, because I think we're all poised to figure out ways to give that. In the meantime, let me turn to you, Mayor Sadowy. I think the cities live off of knowing their citizens, having the direct interaction, their needs, their wants, and to have them be met, because what cities do better than any other entity is they deliver proof of concept, whether it's in these transition moments, and all of our cities around the world are in some ways moments of major transitions from decarbonization to demographic and democratic transitions. We're all changing drastically in the way that we work, but it's no more vital than, of course, in the Ukrainian cities. And with all these IDBs, we know from research that the International Crisis Group does every single year that once people are displaced, they're often displaced for effectively 1 or 2 generations, roughly 20 years on average. So when you describe the millions of people that are moving into Lviv, if they are potentially your new citizens, and it's about creating a sense of local democracy, shared ownership, shared progress, how are you thinking about doing that? What tools are you using? Is technology helpful there for your citizens who've left Lviv to go elsewhere? How do you stay in touch? How do you know that you're fully with your citizens and can provide those citizen services? What's the most helpful there?
Ну, ви повинні розуміти просту істину.
You should realize one simple thing. The Ukrainian victory has 2 legs. One is de-occupation, and the other is reconstruction of Ukraine. And the time of reconstruction and transformation will need to be very brief. We'll continue to have Russia as our neighbor. I don't know what should happen to get rid of its neighborhoods. It won't happen overnight, so we should be strong, united, independent, and even now in war times we are developing new strategy for the city of Lviv. I know it may sound strange, but this is what we do. The new strategy for Lviv will be founded on the general ecosystem, municipal ecosystem, where various aspects will be taken into account. We are preparing for a number of war veterans and other people who will need support from the municipality. We should also secure very good transportation, municipal transportation, especially electric transportation. And I think that respect for the man and his or her dignity is the very foundation of democracy, so that we listen to everyone. Even before the war, we had participatory budgets, and very many people wanted to speak their minds and to impact the development of Lviv. Ukraine is the cradle of democracy right now. The impact of totalitarian system under communist and Soviet times was extremely destructive, but now we see reconstruction underway. Ukraine should become EU and NATO member state, because this would be to the benefit of the 2 institutions as well, because you will receive these state inhabited by wise people who know how to stand for their freedom, to fight for their freedom and for ours. I'm very optimistic. In spite of all the hurdles and difficulties, I can see things happening in our individual cities. And I understand that the reform of the whole of the country will need to be triggered off. It is more difficult to be democratic in wartime conditions, but each and every of us is in charge. Mayor Klitschko is in charge of what is happening in Kyiv. I am in charge of what is happening in Lviv. President Zelensky is in charge of what is happening in Ukraine. And you must remember and realize that the specter of Moscow will never change, because this is what they've been like all the time. And if we cannot split it into smaller parties and parts, we should isolate Moscow. Ukraine is part and parcel of democratic society. Democracy is very much in our blood. Thank you.
That phrase, it's easier to be democratic in wartime, that will stick with me. Because then if you're constantly encircled by authoritarian questions, authoritarian dangers in peacetime, it does become about what are your tools, what are your internal tools to make sure that the democracy internal to your environment works and that you can scale and make that comparable within the network. So Mayor Karácsony, unfortunately it seems like we've lost Mayor Klitschko, who was about to give us a priority list of what he needs to be thinking about, sort of how we rebuild rule of law, faith in democracy, active engagement with City Hall and beyond. What does interacting with the Pact allow you to build and do to in the inside of your city? You have had a green agenda, you've had a transformational agenda, you've had a youth agenda, you've had an agenda for LGBTQ people. How has this collaboration within the Pact be able to give you more tools of direct democracy to deepen democracy in your city?
Van egy nagyon-nagyon fontos kérdés, amiben azt gondolom, hogy lehet most az ukrán testvéreink között.
Well, this has been a very important question. This has been a very important question. The most important precondition for democracy is trust, the capital of trust. Let us hope that the war will be over and that spiritually braced Ukrainian people will bring the war to the end and will be capable to renew themselves and restore themselves. If the society has enough of trust and wants to take up this democratic transformation, well, this will be a massive wealth. Trust is a very delicate thing. It's difficult to gain and win someone's trust. It's very easy to lose it. If we look at the manifestations of democratic crisis worldwide, we normally have in mind institutions, jurisdiction, media, etc. But democracy is more than institutions. This is also the cultural climate, the culture of democracy. We, in my country, we are not in wartime conditions, so I will not compare the actual warfare to Cold War. But why do we have problems with democracy in Hungary? For 20 years now, we've been under Cold War conditions, political Cold War conditions, and this really has a devastating effect on democracy. And without trust, there won't be democracy. Citizens would never consider or think that the government of their country works for their benefit. Just the opposite. They take the government with a pinch of salt, and I, as an interlocutor with the Hungarian government, I'm treated as a traitor. So this Soviet-like propaganda suggests that people must be kept in fear, in anxiety, without any trust, without any confidence, just to have as a rescue some strong prime minister who will defend the society against all illusionary anxieties. So I think this is a massive opportunity for mayors and presidents of cities, building this capital of trust as a cornerstone for effective democracy. And we, as city leaders in this part of Europe, we must try to restore this confidence, this trust, especially in the states where there is deficit in democracy and freedom. And we must really restore this sense of democracy and trust. We must be even closer to our citizens. We must build community, because this is the breeding ground for trust.
Going on in election campaign going on in Poland, and I think for all of us who arrived here yesterday in the
Rozumiem, że w tej chwili
extremely moving stream of people. Equipped with European flags, and the last time I was in Warsaw was just the moment when the decision had been taken to take the European flags away from every place and also uproot some of Poland's most recent history. As we wrap up this discussion and begin to foreshadow the next one, when it's about this whole idea of I think Mayor Karácsony made that very clear, restoring trust and faith in a system that is under siege as we head into these 35 elections, and of course a major election across the United States that will influence all of our lives here in Europe, because the United States has been so vital in helping Ukraine, but also a European election. And building this trust internal to a country, beginning with the Polish election here, and then building out forward, what are your hopes and desires for the immediate future of democracy, beginning right here, right now?
Well, they're very simple. We just need to win the next election. I think that at the end of the day, as I am repeating continuously, fortunately, in most of our countries, there is this resilience of the people. And especially in countries such as Poland and Hungary, you know, we've regained our full independence only 30 years ago. So we still remember, you know, the raison d'être for our democracy and for our strong membership within the European Union and NATO, because this is existential for us. That's why people rebel when they see that Poland could be put on the margins of the European Union and maybe even taken out as a consequence of this unprofessional government, which is using exactly the same arguments against the European Union as the British Conservative Party, you know, has been for years, which ended up with Brexit. That's why you see so many European flags. That's why we keep being tough and resilient, and that's why you've seen such a mobilization yesterday on the streets of Warsaw, the mobilization of the whole society. And I hope it will translate itself into a full mobilization for the next elections.
Resilience, trust, and very pragmatic solutions, from participatory budgeting to ability to listen to new citizens, to a continued ability to deliver on the most basic needs and the most fundamental rights of citizens in cities, but from there, cities and democracies. Please join me in thanking my wonderful panel, Mayor Klitschko. Courage, we are with you. And thank you, Mayor Sadowy. Thank you. Thanks to this wonderful panel. Gentlemen, you are now excused as we head almost straight exactly into our next conversation, which will be the fusion of many of the ideas that we've heard here of rebuilding civic infrastructure, civic functionality, but doing it both in the physical space dealing with the architecture of memory, grappling with trauma in our society. So many of us in our own societies after World War II were so deeply affected and needed to negotiate and renegotiated that and learned from that experience. We talked about Ukraine, where mayors are kidnapped, where cities are renamed, where just the destruction of physical sites of memory, of home, have been a hallmark of this war. UNESCO confirmed in the first 3 weeks of bombardment, Kharkiv experienced the loss and damage of at least 27 historical buildings. And you know that the Hague Convention lists that kind of loss as a loss to all of humanity. And yet we have seen remarkable stories of restoration, which we'll talk about in our next panel in just a moment. But before we do that, and before I welcome our next set of panelists on the stage, we have a message from the mayor of Odessa. And here it is.
Шановні пане мери, мешканці та гості красивого та величного міста Варшава. Мої вітання вільному народу Європи від вільного міста Одеси. Сьогоднішній саміт є визначною подією для всього світу. Нашим спільним завданням є просування європейських цінностей, духу свободи, демократії та рівності. Саме за це сьогодні бореться Україна на полі бою. Ми вдячні Євросоюзу, зокрема мешканцям Варшави, за проявлену позицію, військову та дипломатичну підтримку, розміщення переселенців та іншу допомогу. Одеса та Варшава підтримують партнерські відносини майже 15 років. Можливо, це невеликий термін, але наша дружба зародилася на спільних інтересах мешканців наших міст та підкріплення солідарністю муніципалітетів. І з кожним роком ми тільки посилюємо нашу взаємодію. Наші міста славяться величною історією, культурою та архітектурою. Сьогодні нас пов'язує ще один спільний напрямок – список Всесвітньої спадщини ЮНЕСКО. Історичний центр Варшава був включений до списку ЮНЕСКО як зразок реставрації знищеної історичної спадщини. Одеса сьогодні в такий спосіб захищає свій історичний центр від знищення російськими ракетами. Сьогодні ми формуємо органи управління та контролю. Напрацьовуємо алгоритм дій зі збереження універсальної цінності Одеси та потребуємо допомоги міст, які вже пройшли цей шлях. Війна в Україні довела силу нашої єдності. Об'єднуючись, ми стаємо сильнішими та долаємо всі перешкоди, що постають перед нами. Бажаю учасникам саміту плідної праці. Вірю, що цей рік стане переможним для України і наступний саміт ми проведемо в Одесі. Дякую за увагу.
The next summit in Odessa. Thank you to the mayor of Odessa. I want to begin welcoming gradually our mayors to the stage. And it's a great honor for me to have this conversation with the deputy mayor of Kharkiv and, of course, the mayor of Bucza. Bucza was brutalized and the world wept to see what happened there. But if you look now to some of the places of some of the most horrific violence, you'll see images of hope, images of rebuilding, images of change, and images of revitalization. So please join me as they come on stage. First, the mayor of Bucza, Anatolii Fedoruk, the deputy mayor of Kharkiv, Sergiy Kuzmin, the mayor of Bratislava, Vallo, and Michał Kazuki, the Director of Heritage Protection right here in the city of Warsaw. Please join me in welcoming to the stage. Well, we heard from this last panel in a very direct manner what it takes to rebuild trust, how we think about citizen participation, but above all, that goes back to having a city in which people are, in which people can find trust, in which people can be, and in which they can collectively together process the horrors that they have been through. And that's no more true than in Bucza. Your town was brutalized, it was deracinated, it was injured, and yet when I look at what's going on there today, you see an enormous amount of productivity, an enormous amount of active rebuilding engagement. I've even seen voices of supreme optimism out of Bucza. And when we all look for resilience and narratives of resilience, certainly I think now people are looking to Bucza. I wanted to ask you first to share a little bit about where your town is, where the oblast is, and how you're doing, frankly.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear friends. Every time I have an opportunity to discuss, for example, with journalists or experts or citizens who are far away from warfare and from the heart of the war, I have to do some explaining. I have to tell people that local government in our cities and villages over the past, I would say, 8 years have been in a have operated in a survival mode. And survival has become critical after the 24th of February 2022. We are looking for mechanisms. We're seeking to identify mechanisms that can be used in order to build assurance to people who are fighting this war in the front line that the local governments and the local communities will be out for them, will provide services, all the essential services that are necessary to protect the civilian population at the time of assault, and that we will be capable of providing municipal services. As a civilian, I find it extremely daunting and devastating to see that a dead city, a city that was where people defected, where people left it behind to look for security. And when the city is freed again, you really have to start rebuilding immediately. You have to spread the positive signals for the citizens who have scattered all across Europe. For them to understand and appreciate that whilst they are in the safe havens abroad, they should still be in touch with us, and they should feel assured of the prowess of our armed forces that will fight for them to be able to come back. The local governments in Ukraine is facing much more challenges, many more challenges than it did before the war. We have so much more to do in order to survive, to persevere, and to win, and to help our citizens be reunited with the city. And here, it is so important, so essential that European cities should be in touch with us, and it's so important that we collaborate. My colleagues in Germany, in Poland, in the city of Pszczyna, or in the city of Palanga in Lithuania, my colleagues have already were ready to start assisting me right on day one, because they understood our predicament. They put themselves in our shoes, and they immediately wondered how they could help, to survive at the time of hardship, and then to recover, to rebuild, to restore the city. We have partnerships, horizontal partnerships, what I call folk or people's democracy that allows local communities to have a sense of being supported, of never being alone and left behind as they face hardships. Not always can we rely on the central government to support us, because we understand how the Ukrainian state is operating, what kind of budget it has. So we cannot look up to them all of the time. So we need to build and cement ties so that we can help the great Ukraine after the decentralization reform of Ukraine. We made one important step towards success. The first major step towards democracy, the first major step to values that had united the nations of Europe before. May I take the liberty of revisiting a point that has already been made here, the values that the Ukrainian nation decided to uphold. The our northern neighbor has decided to punish us for the choice. But we said no, we would not yield, and we would win as democracy wins over autocracy and as light wins over darkness. Now, as far as the reconstruction of the country is concerned, we need to be comprehensive and broad, and my colleague, the mayor of Kyiv, has already mentioned this. Of course, it is essential that we rebuild building schools and preschools, but it is perhaps even more important that we rebuild the city fabric, livable spaces, so that Bucza citizens can actually be part of an effort to restore the city, because they will be able to tell their grandchildren.
As the deputy mayor of Kyiv, the city is often described as the heroine city, the city that has stood up over and over again through history of trauma. It was the site of course, critical battles in World War II, and now it has been a site of enormous destruction. As I mentioned, 27 buildings in the first 3 weeks of the war, many considered to be cradles of our joint civilization. And we just heard from the mayor of Bucza, the most important thing is to quickly rebuild some of the physical components to get back to a sense of trust and shared space. But building the civic space, the wider civic space, is such a challenge. You have your own history to turn to, but now you have others who want to help in thinking and getting that right again as the hero city of Kharkiv. What are your priorities now in this sort of medium interstices time?
Good afternoon. I am so happy to be able to meet with you. And on behalf of the mayor of our city, Mr. Telehov, I would like to thank you very much for inviting us. Our city has indeed experienced quite a number of sad things over the past 2 years. My colleagues have already alluded to this. It would be extremely hard for us to stand against the assault and defend ourselves in all aspects of that process, if you like. Now, it is said that a desire to assist travels at a speed of light, and it is as important as light is. And Indeed, we are committed to rebuilding historic monuments, but not only other civic infrastructure, schools and kindergartens and hospitals, and the local communities need to be rebuilt as well, because the local communities may have lost the sense of the future, and they have been probably overwhelmed by the situation and confused. And with our partners, we are more capable of giving people reassurance, and the sense of safety and a sense that the past will be returned to them, and what has been going on around them is just a bad dream that is likely to be over. The mayor, Terehov, is now busy developing a new zoning plan for the city, working with Norman Foster, and we are designing a new transportation plan as a backbone of the city, and we'll put some green muscles on this backbone. And so experts are helping us rebuild not all the historic heritage sites. Yesterday I took a stroll through the streets of my city, and I saw how well Warsaw has been rebuilt, especially the old town. All we see are some remnants of, the holes resulting from bullets shot at the building. I mean, it is miraculous what Polish people have done in Warsaw, if I can judge it by the pictures I saw.
And said very clearly there, look, the Abercrombie plan for the City of London was in place 2 years before you had peace in London, and you could even think about implementing it. So I think your point about starting early to begin to create new spaces in which people meet, encounter, and AJ Banga, who just took over as head of the World Bank, as the head of MasterCard, said that the most successful cities are the places in which everybody takes public transportation, everybody uses the same infrastructure and interacts in that way. So I thank you for sharing just how the sequencing and very pragmatically how the sequencing is coming about. We have Marcus Vallo on our panel, not just because he is a founding member of the Pact of Free Cities, but also because he is an award-winning architect and has thought about a lot of these dimensions in the urban space in his city, but now I think increasingly probably globally, and the issues of architecture, of equity, what makes our cities interactive, equal, functional, safe. And I wanted to have you think through how you thought about this in Bratislava. Bratislava too, of course, this history, it was, I think in the Brezhnev era, it was considered the Soviet model city, and you have had, I was just there for the Globsec Bratislava forum, and I enjoyed it very much and can't wait to come back. But in this period between '89 and now, a remarkable transformation of the city itself, dealing with its own history, its own legacy, negotiating different components of its history, the histories of communism, of repression. So I wondered if you could share with us, as you're sharing, I'm sure, with Ukrainian cities, how you think about preserving history, moving history forward, and creating equity in your city.
Thank you very much. Yes, I just want to mention one story. We went in January with my friends, mayors, to Kyiv and Bucza. And of course, we already saw the plans for the new environment around the church. So they're already doing it. It's fantastic and it's brave. This is a unique possibility I see here as an architect, as a mayor, to build a physical space which will bring not only the sense of identity, of the sense of healing, but also the next future. I mean, this is, and the trust. Of course, if we are talking about the public realm, public space, public building, in architecture, of course, they are connected with building the trust in government or local government. As a mayor, I see public space as a space for democracy, very important. But as an architect, I see public space as a space which influence how the people feel in their city. And that's very also important. And of course, how the people feel in the city influence how they treat their neighbors, how they behave. This is one of the most important element in the city lives, or how the city works. And I mean, in this very unjust and tragic war, there is a possibility to rebuild it, but not only in physical sense, but also in sense, psychological sense. You can build identity, you can build the trust, and okay, of course, you can bring back the past in a way, in a new optics. Of course, you never bring the past in a physical space or physical form as it was, but it's a big chance to move on and be better. That's the main thing, to just have a better future. And it's incredible. You saw the pictures of Norman Foster already there. Many people are already helping. The cities are already helping, and I really believe it's time. It's also already happening, and I saw it in what we're doing in Bratislava. We trying really understand our past, of course, but how we can make a better future, still keeping the past in our minds, and try to heal everything which happened in different scale, but in terms of physical space.
Michal, since the fall of the wall, but I mean, obviously, frankly, since the end of World War II, Warsaw has been through these similar cycles of rebuilding, reinventing itself, restoring authenticity that's modern and democratic. But we just heard from the mayor of Odessa, he's very jealous in a way of your UNESCO World Heritage certification for the old town. That's his ambition. That is likely the ambition of many mayors in Ukraine, because that is a signifier of real preservation and real investment of the world in historical memory. You're doing two things. You're actively helping cities in Ukraine, but you're also very much connecting it to the architecture of reviving from trauma. So I wonder if you can share with us how Warsaw did it and how you're quote unquote playing it forward.
Thank you for this question. Yes, I will speak from my perspective as art historian, but also as a representative of OWHC, so Organization World Heritage Cities for Central Eastern Europe, on behalf, of course, of the mayor. And also as a leader of initiative taken by the Mayor Trzaskowski last year, called House of Rebuild of Ukraine, which is kind of a platform on which, together with our Ukrainian partners, because this is what we're focusing on, to speak with them as a partners, not to give them advice or to be a mentor, but to cooperate and to find altogether solutions, common solutions. So actually we deal with all these issues that you've mentioned. So from one side, how to recreate this trauma into something better, something new, and from our also experience, 1945, 1955, because these were 10 crucial years, 10 crucial decade that created the whole historical center. We've seen, or maybe we can share with such an experience, that reconstruction is the first step some kind of first medicine for this trauma. I mean, if you think about reconstruction or rebuild, then it gives people joy, then it gives people some purpose, some goals. And by us, it was actually some kind of the beginning of the myth of reconstruction. And this is how it begins, and this is what was awarded by UNESCO with signing at the UNESCO list in 1980. Happily, Odessa is having been destroyed, so Odessa won't be Odessa is a UNESCO city as a historical city, not as a rebuilt city. So it's extremely different. But of course, in the frames of managing or the management of this UNESCO site, it might be similar. And this is what we want to share with our Odessa friends in just a couple of weeks, because we have such an experience among also other OWHC, so this UNESCO organization, cities, this experience, how to manage, how to deal with the UNESCO side. But the point is also that when we think about reconstruction, we have to figure out what we actually want to do and not to rush. I mean, we have to think about it very deeply, try to involve every stakeholders, to invite them to this discussion, because the worst thing is to forget about some people. Try to work with our own resources, not only with international architects, but also to include Ukrainian ones. And at the end, just as I mentioned before, not to rush. So try to think about our history from a distance. So last week we had a discussion, long discussion on this platform I've mentioned, House of Rebuild of Ukraine, which is actually kind of a think tank platform together which we created together with Ukrainian cities such like Kyiv, Dnipro, Odessa, Chernihiv, Lviv, Czerniowce, Kharkiv also, many of them. And all together we've just came to this conclusion that maybe some interventions, artistic interventions or interventions that are coming from the people are allowed, but remembrance and commemorization is something that needs a little bit of time, just like a distance, just to rethink what we want to do. And to the end, you've mentioned our experience in 1945. The huge discussion that took place that time was what should be rebuilt, what shouldn't be. And there was a huge conflict between those who want to modernize the city and those who want to leave these relics of the city, also including ruins. So it was actually a huge fight. And finally, when we are reading some documents that were sent, they were sending these documents themselves. It might be very interesting what ways actually won this battle. And also is complexity, it's a combination, because we've decided to save or to leave some relics and maybe to restore them, like a historical center, but also to leave some places that should be unrebuilt. Yeah. Just maybe not ruined, but unrebuilt, like some kind of significant symbol of this remembrance, just not to erase our memory, not to erase our history, but to leave something for future generations.
I mean, all these cities have in common the tragedy of having lost so many of their citizens, and how we deal with the culture of memory and create space for memory when we're in the process of rebuilding, I think is a fundamental challenge. And we see this right across the world and how we deal with various memories of conflict. The United States is going through this too in terms of deciding whether they pull down monuments or not, or do the monuments of egregious violations of civic rights, rights of Americans, African-American population, do they stand in the middle of the square as a reminder that this should happen never again, or do they go into museums as reminders of this should never happen again, or what humans are able to do to other humans? And I think the point that you made, try to give the citizens back their own ability to begin to define that before the before the central administration comes in. I think you began to articulate that, Mayor Fedoruk, but I want you to have another chance of how are you doing this locally, giving the individual room for both the rebuilding, but also their memory, the work of grief and trauma, but in a way that they are hopefully held by their community.
З вашого дозволу, дозволю собі заперечити колезі.
Well, in the first place, I beg to disagree with the previous speaker. We should not be in a rush, we should not be in a hurry. And if we talk about historical memorials and sites that were not inhabited, there is no pressing need to rebuild them immediately. We can wait and see. However, in such cities as mine, and there are quite many of them, well, we have 712 families living in container towns, waiting with anxiety for the approach of the next winter. So hoping that the global community will come to our aid, we still need to do things quickly, because the best way to support them is to show them that we are rebuilding their building blocks, their houses, tenement houses. And I do appreciate all the work, sterling work that is done by our psychologists and therapists, but I think that the best ray of hope for the people is to see with their own eyes how their houses are reconstructed. 3 weeks after the occupation, we had a working meeting in Kyiv, and we spoke about all the circumstances and about the critical needs of our city. And commemoration was mentioned as one of critical aspects, because the people, the society, would not like to forget and forgive. And we came to the conclusion that the commemoration that is most adequate would not be burnt buildings or tanks, but rather human narratives along with the inhabitants of our city. We came to the conclusion that we should draw on the world's experiences, and to this end we started cooperation with Dunkirk, the French Dunkirk, which also suffered heavy losses, and also with other cities that were devastated in the aftermath of war. They supported us and they illustrated to us how memory should be best preserved. For instance, in the recollections of a father who lost his son, a grandmother who lost her granddaughter in the wake of a Russian aggression, and in Bucza we will have very many people who have such traumatic experiences. One museum building will not be sufficient to accommodate this trauma. Quite recently, we commemorated Ukrainian children who were killed by the Russian Federation. Many of them were just several days old. They were so young that they were before their kindergarten age. And then the Russians simply terminated their lives. It is very important to translate the wishes of the public, of the society, into concrete commemoration. There were also experts suggesting that we should rebuild everything the modern way, glass and steel. But Volodymyr Zelensky, who joined the meeting, said we should not impose anything on them, what they want, what the local people want in Bucza. They should have a say. They should have their first-hand recommendations. And year after liberation of Bucza, we have ready-made memorials in which we will commemorate victims of the Russian aggression. These will be memorial sites also in Orthodox churches surrounded with graves of the victim of this aggression. Everywhere where people were shedding blood, we will commemorate them.
This was a shorter session. You realized I didn't take a long time to introduce my panel to you, but they've gotten right to the point. So I want to give the Deputy Mayor of Kharkiv the last word. So I want to go back to Bratislava and this whole idea, because what's in this is a little bit of the beginning of that transitional justice narrative. How you deliver justice to people so that they feel that there is space for memory, but also for equity, and that they're participating in that search for justice, because that's a human emotion. This is all about restoring dignity to us as individuals, the survivors, but also to the ones we've lost. And in these historic cities, Warsaw and Bratislava, that in some regard that's ongoing. So if you think back, are you as Bratislava, as the Pact, is transitional justice help for these cities? Is that part of the program of the Pact and how you want to deliver on the democratic promises?
Of course, one of the topic of the Pact in last month was how to help Ukrainian cities, and as a Mayor Rafał tell it not only in some kind of symbolic way, even if the symbolic way, a symbolic gesture is very important. We saw it when we visited Ukraine this January. The main help must be in concrete and particular aids and help. So what is important, I think it's going to be, I mean, we cannot give €1 billion, we cannot give the everything which central government should donate and help, but what we can give is a know-how, is our experience, is everything we can accomplish together. Bratislava is also the city which used to be 45 years in a socialist bloc, and it's also, it has, even if not in such a tragical circumstances, but we already have this discussion behind us. What are the future of the city? What are we doing with the past? How we preserve the past, the good part of the past, not the best one? How we use the new physical spaces, the new rebuilding to once again building trust and building better future. That's always the same thing. So I think the very good mention was that, I mean, Ukraine is a big country with very, very good and quality professionals in the field of architecture and urbanism and everything. But it's always good to have some outside look. It's always have to have a second look and different optics. So I think we are ready, and mainly Polish city are already doing it to give the hand and helping in terms of know-how from field of architecture, participation, urbanism.
Michal, if you'll excuse me, because we're running out of time, but I know these all the people in the room will have some chance to speak to you more intensely in our coffee break. If you could just give us 2 bullet points on sort of how you've gathered resources here in Warsaw and taken them to which cities in Ukraine, and conversely, how you're also looking out into the rest of the world, how they're doing some of this transitional justice work as it applies to the rebuilding of physical architecture and democracy. Just 2 points, and then the Deputy Mayor of Kharkiv will see us out.
Okay, so just very, very briefly. At first, the first step to reconstruction is to stabilize all these buildings, all this heritage that should just remain after the war, that we want to. So this is the first ballot. I mean, help them to stabilize. So sending materials, sending staffs, equipment, etc. And this is, and we've invited many European cities to join our initiative, and there is huge response. And also in the frames of our platform, we did some kind of international coordination with some international funds such as Lviv or World Monument Fund, or also UNESCO. So this is what we are focusing right now, because also winter might be crucial.
Yeah.
Coming winter. This is the first point. The second is just to, of course, regarding what you've said, I'm absolutely agree that there is no discussion on waiting when you have to rebuild houses, but to try to rethink history. The second balance, and as a key to then to decision what to leave, what not to leave, also including architecture from Soviet times.
Rethinking history, but doing it with new methods. We are at a stage when things like the smart cities technology is growing fourfold every year. The ability to rethink, the ability to rethink, reimagine cities through all manner of technology, including the city of Wellington in New Zealand that does it all in the metaverse. So you are both struggling with sort of the day-to-day. You're getting this kind of help, but then there's sort of the 30,000-foot perspective as well. And I think all of our hopes in supporting the rebuilding of Ukraine is that it makes leaps in terms of green transformation, in terms of technological transformation. We've talked now a lot about the history and architecture of memory. But for you, how are you going to propel Kharkiv? Or maybe it's too early to think about it, but maybe that gives you optimism to propel it into the future. Can you leave us with some thoughts on that?
На мою думку, звичайно, не передчасно.
Indeed, it is not too early to ask these questions. I suppose one has to talk about and think about the future right now. We have to put blueprints together. We have to have all the design documentation in place as so that we can rely on them in rebuilding our heritage sites and buildings. We have to secure talent to help us identify the key challenges. We need to have experts in construction, structural aspects, utilities, electricity, water, etc. Now, that obviously requires enormous budgets, which we currently don't have. So the support from UNESCO and other international sources will be absolutely instrumental so that we can at least start building design documentation for these buildings. Of course, we have to adapt. We have to adapt to and stay in compliance with Ukrainian technical standards, and perhaps we will have to take over some international standards in order to build green cities. By the way, Kharkiv is one of the greenest cities in Ukraine. We have lots of parks in the center, in the central part. It's like a central park, like Central Park in New York, indeed. And these locations, these venues are hugely popular with the local people, but they also attract people, visitors from Dnipro and Poltava and other cities because they are excellent recreational spaces, absolutely loved by children who can buy candy and other sweets here. This is what it was like before the war, and I'm hoping that we will come back to this.
Green and technologically driven and energy independent future for Ukraine. I say this because for those of you watching at home, you cannot see that the EU Commissioner has joined us, and we will talk about energy and transformation in the next panel. But for now, I want to thank all of you for leaving us with this optimistic and yet concrete perspective on how we reflect back on the memory of our histories, of our shared traumas, how we can share moving forward the best ways to commemorate those we have lost, but incorporate them in our civic life going forward, including in our architecture. Thank you to my panel, and thank you, all of you in the room. We now have a coffee break. I'm assuming it will be slightly shorter because we have run slightly over, but please do go and enjoy it.
panels before us. It was a fascinating conversation, very timely conversation, very rich conversation. And I guess this panel, although it's on a slightly different topic, but I think it fits quite well into this broader democracy framing, because given the current geopolitical situation, energy is democracy, energy security is about defending democracy in Europe. So I think it's extremely critical that this was put on the agenda, and we have a fantastic started lineup to unpack all this. But before we go to the panel, let me ask Commissioner Simson, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your keynote speech in advance. You need no introduction for this room or anywhere else, but you have been leading the charge on European energy security since 2019 in the von der Leyen Commission, and we are very excited and eager to learn more about how cities fit into this overall strategic framework. So the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and I'm really honored to start the last panel and to see that room is again full of people, and indeed we do have a very important topic to discuss. And I'm, of course, very deeply honored to address this third summit of the Pact of Free Cities. So, distinguished guests, dear mayors, the focus this year, democracy in Ukraine, is near to my heart. Russia's invasion of Ukraine brought war and all the suffering that goes with it back to Europe. And every day it drags on is a reminder of the dangers of authoritarian and totalitarian regimes, of what happens when international law and democracy are blatantly disregarded. On the front lines of this war are Ukrainian towns and cities where people have lost lives, where buildings and infrastructure has been damaged, and where power blackouts are all too frequent. Despite all this, they continue to struggle for freedom, a struggle which has also radically impacted the EU energy landscape over the past year. Even before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia had begun using energy as a weapon against the European economy. What followed was the most serious energy crisis we have seen in a generation, and today I'll talk about what this crisis has meant for Europe's energy system, how we are investing massively in renewable energy, and the instrumental role for cities in all these efforts. Dear colleagues, just a few weeks ago, we marked the first anniversary of REPowerEU. This was our plan to break our dependence on Russian fossil fuels. 1 year on, we can say that Putin's attempt to blackmail Europe using energy has failed. 1 year on, we did what many thought impossible. Citizens, companies, Europeans all together saved almost 18% of their gas demand between August and March this year, and we diversified gas supplies, strengthening key strategic partnership with reliable suppliers. Compared to March of last year, we reduced EU imports of Russian gas by 3/4. We also invested in renewables like never before, accelerating their deployment at record speed, and results have surpassed all expectations. And on top of that, carbon emissions dropped in Europe by 2.5%, when globally they still rose by 1%. As I look to the future, consolidating these achievements, especially in terms of renewables, is our top priority. Europe will only truly be energy independent once we have built an energy system with homegrown renewable energies. At the same time, we are doing exactly what we said we'd do under the European Green Deal, staying the course towards climate neutrality by 2050. We are ambitious. We now have a binding target of 42.5% renewable energy in our mix by 2030. And this means adding about 1.5 times more wind and solar capacity by 2030 than we have right now. And to achieve that, we are pursuing a number of different avenues. First, we are investing in electricity infrastructure to upgrade our networks. Electricity is set to become our main energy carrier between 2030 and 2040, and it's the most cost-effective way to decarbonize our economy. So we must be ready for the rapid uptake of renewables and electrified demand, like electric vehicles or heat pumps. Second, we have made permitting procedures for renewable projects easier and faster. And under new legislation, planning, constructing, and operation of renewable plants will be presumed as being an overriding public interest. And it's now on member states to implement those changes domestically. And third, we are creating better conditions for investment in new renewable generation, because today a large share of renewable generation receives support, but in ways that are too expensive and not competitive, and which is why we want to incentivize more investment and lower cost for member states, and ensure that consumers, but also small and medium enterprises, benefit more directly from lower cost renewables. And fourth, we are tackling the skills gap in our workforce, because number of households installing solar PVs on the rooftops could have been significantly higher had it not have been for the long waiting times, and this is partly due to the insufficient number of installers. And a new large-scale renewable energy skills partnership will address this. And as you can imagine, the changes required to shape this clean energy transition are tremendous. We will only succeed by being in this together. And your role as cities and towns is crucial. We already saw the success of the Covenant of Mayors Cities Energy Sprint implemented in over 50 cities. This was an instrumental toolbox with energy-saving tips on heating and lighting and mobility. And there are a number of other ways you can keep our citizens involved. You can take part in citizens and renewable energy community projects in both electricity and gas markets, and this is something that Commission is supporting through initiatives like energy community repositories. And finally, there are resources to help you. We have funds available through the Horizon Europe mission on climate neutral and smart cities, a LIFE program, the European City Facility, and with respect to private investment, the Smart Cities Marketplace. To conclude, we are emerging from the crisis with cautious optimism. However, we cannot be complacent. The war has not yet been won. Preparing for a dry summer and a cold winter is the next test here in Europe. The good news is that we have the vision and the tools to face these challenges, and we also have one another. And because the only real way forward for a secure, clean, and affordable energy system is through collaboration. Thank you for your attention.
And if I may ask Madam Mayor and Mr. Mayor to also join us on stage. Can you hear me? You can now. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to do away with the pleasantries because you're really pressed by time. Let me just say that we are joined by two exemplary leaders on the municipal level, Mr. Giuseppe Sala from the city of Milan and Mayor Alexandra Dudkiewicz from the city of Gdansk. And I want to delve immediately into the conversation, building up on the excellent remarks by the commissioner. And just on a personal note, up until about 2018, early 2019, I dealt quite a lot in a previous capacity of mine in Washington, D.C. at one of the think tanks with European energy security and energy geopolitics. And I have been a little out of it for the past couple of years. It's really remarkable how far we have traveled as I started reading myself into the developments and listening to your speech. And that's thanks and a testament to your leadership and the boldness of the European Union and the Repower EU and many other plans. So it's really fascinating how the progress is visible on the ground. Let me turn first to Mayor Dudkiewicz, and because Poland and Polish cities are on the front line, so to speak, when it comes to the energy security issue. And then on top of that, Gdansk has been an exemplary leader in that regard. In 4 climate-related categories, Gdansk is leading the charge in Poland. You have a green public procurement program. You have a clean air priority program and many other measures. If you could talk a little bit about the impact of the current crisis and the war against Ukraine and what measures you put in place to pivot away from dependence.
Thank you very much for invitation, and I'm really happy to be here together with you. Very briefly, we have serious problems on those issues, not only regarding energy supply, but actually last week we had a special session of the City Council on the because many parts of Gdansk, our harbor, which is not governed by the city, we have only 2.5% of the shares. Rest is run by the central government. Through our harbor, almost 90% of deliveries of the coal to Poland are in Gdansk, and the whole transportation of the coal, which is not really good quality, goes through my city. So the situation, in this sense, totally, we could say, somehow a part of the main topic. But this is the real issue regarding clean air. What about our program? It's rather gone for some districts of the city. And the people, of course, can understand that we need to have energy supply. Okay. Some of them can understand or not that we don't have that many alternative way of heating our houses and our alternative energetic systems. But many districts, at least 1/3 of the city, is seriously covered with the coal all over the city. And we really don't know when it will finish. We all think that it will finish after the war, and this is one of the way. The other issues are also extremely important. We want to continue our programs. This is why those aims of our Pact of Free Cities to have direct access for the funding from European Union, direct access through the cities, not through the government, are extremely important, because without supply from the European Union, we will not be able to change it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I may turn to Mayor Sala. Mr. Mayor, you are the C40 Vice Chair for Europe, and you are also the chair of the Mayoral Task Force on a Green and Just Recovery. And under your leadership, the city of Milan last year in June, if I'm not mistaken, adopted an air and climate plan, and you have the aspiration to become fully carbon neutral by 2050. Can I ask you, what role can cities and city networks in that regard play alongside the European Commission and other key players to alleviate energy poverty specifically and support the energy transition?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, even from my side. I recently met the commissioner and we share some very simple idea. Number one, the cities can be the best allies for Europe. And that is not banal, it's the reality. Because sustainability is a wonderful word, it's a wonderful idea. But unless we give a solid demonstration to our citizens that there is an advantage for them, we risk a lot. So it can become a boring story, and we cannot allow that. Even because the situation in the cities sometimes is difficult. My colleague make an example, which is true for most of us. We live in metropolitan areas. I am mayor of Milan. I am metropolitan mayor of the metropolitan city, but in reality, my real power stops at the limit of Milan. Let me give you one, again, very simple example. Milan established a huge low emission zone. It's taking 70% of the city. So it's the city. In this low emission zone, the most polluting cars cannot enter. From a social point of view, it is not easy, because normally the people owning those kind of cars are sometimes poor people. And this is my job to decide if it is better to work on the environment or to privilege the social justice. It is fundamental to have a real trust in the environmental transformation. Otherwise, you are fear, you stop. And why we have a problem? In Milan, we have a population which is around 1.4 million inhabitants, but in the metropolitan city, it is around 3.4. We work to reduce the number of private cars in the city, and now we are more or less at the level of 51 private cars per 100 inhabitants. And we work offering them, let me say, a better public transport system, but also having some limits. But if the region doesn't stay at our speed, if they build new roads, but not building, infrastructure, working on train, giving the opportunity to the people who live in the neighborhood, in the peripheries, but they need to enter into the city, it's a disaster. And we are facing this kind of problem. So there is also a problem which is the role of the city. And we are very practical, and we face the real problem, the real attitude of the people. So again, to be in line with the European Commission is fundamental. And it is fundamental that they ask the government to have the main cities seated at the table when they take decision. In Italy, we are investing we are receiving a lot of money, and the Commission knows very well from the Next Generation EU. And it's public debate. We are risking to lose part of those funds. A couple of years ago, I told the journalist, if my country is not in condition to invest all the money, please give a part to Milan, because we are in condition. It was provocative. No, it was not provocative, because if you invest 100, you cannot invest 1,000. So it's even a question of capability. And this is fundamental. So it is not only necessary that we receive direct fund for our city, but it is for the whole communities, sometimes for the country. So we are facing the same problem. But what is the real good point? That forgetting if we are left, right, center, we work together. So we can give a good proposition. We can share some vision. Otherwise, we risk, like in Italy, to imagine that to be ecologist means to be left, or the right must be against the environmental transformation, which is crazy. So we understand that sometimes, normally, the right parties are conservative. They look back, but it is not acceptable. We should help everyone to imagine a future where this kind of transformation is compulsory, it's mandatory. So we should work on that. Of course, again, to give an example, if we receive public funds to work on retrofitting on the public buildings, we can create thousands of green jobs. So we can create jobs. On the meantime, those jobs are much more evident that if we invest in fossil business, and the people see and the people can observe the transformation. So there are many, many opportunities, and we are ready. Cities are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And you touched upon two critical issues. One is the jurisdictional issue and like what it means for a city to be in charge of energy policy, and I think that differs widely from city to city, so that makes things a little bit more difficult. And the second one, which we also faced in a Hungarian context, and I guess here in Poland, other cities as well, is what happens if there is inability or unwillingness to absorb funds coming from the EU, either in the recovery and reconstruction facility or the regular budget, because of political issues such as in Italy or in Poland or in Hungary. Is there a way to somehow not circumvent but supplant the national government and channel some of these funds to the cities? And let me put the commissioner on spot when it comes to that, and maybe put that in a wider conversation about some of the vehicles that you already outlined at the beginning, and those are important, but quite frankly, that's not where the big bucks are when it comes to investment into the renewal of energy systems in Europe. So you see an evolving conversation on the European level about this closer connection between cities and Brussels?
Yes, I do, and I just want to echo what my fellow panelists just told us, that cities and European Commission, they are biggest allies. And I have an example from real life. Last year, when Russia started to manipulate with our gas markets, and by doing so created the artificial energy crisis, we were facing the situation where our dominant gas supplier disappeared overnight. And this was not easy task to replace the gas deliveries from Russia, because well, scaling up production for other trusted partners took some time. And it was clear that we have to cut our consumption. Unless we will save gas, we will face a situation in the middle of the winter that some of the homes might be left without heating. Or if we want to heat our homes, then some industry will be left without supply. And I do remember very vividly last spring when representatives of European cities came to my office and presented this energy saving sprint plan, because only behavioral change can also help us, and it did so. So they put forward plans how to adjust the interior temperatures, how to, well, in some cities, they banned the outdoor heating using gas heaters when you don't need it for anything else than just comfort, if you are drinking your coffee or something else. In other places, they prioritized renovation, because why we were so worried about the winter. In the wintertime, Europe consumes 40% more natural gas than in the summertime. We heat our homes. So the very moment when you create local jobs, you bring your citizens more comfortable living environment and lower heating bills. You are doing lots of good things in one act, and help national governments to achieve their targets for national energy and climate plans. And this is my response to you. Right now, all the national governments have to increase their ambition for 2030 national energy and climate plans. So they adopted their plans, what they plan to do with renewables, and how they plan to save energy back in 2019. And these plans are not, well, not ambitious enough anymore. So right now they are upgrading their plans, and keeping in mind that 75% of our inhabitants are living in cities. Without cities, you will not achieve these higher goals. But we do have EU overriding target, 42.5% of the renewables in our energy mix, and then agreement that we will feed our growth, but in the sustainable way. And that means more efficient ways to transport people, to heat our homes, and all the rest of it, like industry, which is also very challenging. But industry also is very often in the territories of the cities.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. This is very encouraging. And let me turn back to the mayors. And yes, of course, EU money is important, and increasing the flow to cities is critically important, but we know full well that the vast majority of investment will still have to come from the private sector and private investment into energy technologies and energy systems. So what can cities do and what your cities are doing to incentivize those private investments into the refurbishment of the energy systems? Mayor Dulkiewicz first.
Well, of course, you have some tools, but main tools are at the legal system, which we are not responsible for. But I'm not going to complain anymore. I'm going to say what we are trying to do. Small steps, but can really, really change the way of people think. I'm going to give example of water retention reservoirs in my city. First, we built it as a city. Small rain gardens, water reservoirs, just to give the example. And now we can see how many private investors, developers, those who are building houses, but not only, also those in an industry, different industry system, how they're changing also their water supply system. So this is also extremely important, not only about the energy, but also about water supply system. Just today, in the morning, I heard that my part of Poland, northern part of Poland, are actually the driest in this part of the year. And the situation is getting serious and serious. Therefore, with some example, some support, some education, just to convince people that it really works, this is what we can do. Just one number. Already, those small water reservoirs and water gardens give half of the system, the general water system reservoir in Poland, in my city, in Gdańsk. So this is that small steps can really change the system. Other issue are, of course, to support people with the changing of the heating system. But the main idea, people are changing heating system from coal to gas. And this is actually what we did for past few years. And now this is the way, and we really don't find the way how to change it. There are no alternatives in also when you live in the northern part of Europe as you live. Yeah. So this is really difficult. So we need to find some solutions, but step by step, definitely we need to get rid of coal system because everyone knows that this is difficult. In Poland, it's generally 72 of our use of energy supply. So very briefly.
Trying to simplify, I believe that we should work on a couple of levels. Number one is reducing bureaucracy, red tapes, because I used to be a manager in the private sector. I devoted 25 years of my life in business. And I mean, companies are not only companies, are managers, executives who decide, who get authorization for a budget and investment plan, and they have a window to invest those amount of money. So they can have the authorization, but if they cannot do that in that time, they lose the money. And when they face the public administration, sometimes they have this in mind. Are they in condition to stay at my speed or not? So that is fundamental. I see many investment in the real sector, in the real estate sector in Milan. But again, they are asking me to give us authorization in a proper time, which is not, I mean, out of the rule. It is in the rule, but respecting time. And then making some taking some practical decision to go in favor of good investment. For instance, again, if you invest in the peripheries working on the student housing, or in any case, with a level of heating system, environment, retrofitting, which is good for me, you pay less construction fee and more on. So you can create the condition to get their trust. They should believe in you. Then I believe that it's natural to find a good combination between private and public. It is crazy if we do not get this. But I mean, in Milan, I see that it is working, and we spend most of our time, of course, being very direct, being very crude. We need that. We need new buildings. We need ecological building. We need to be not always to invest in the center of the city, but working on the peripheries. So that is the reality. They can learn. They can understand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I promised to get you out of here by 2:55, so final round, and this is going to be a lightning round, so 30 seconds or less answers, please. Let me pull back to the whole conversation into the overarching framing of the conference, which is about democracy and democratic inclusion, and ask you about two interrelated issues, like how do you engage your citizens in the climate and energy transition, and how do you in particular protect the most vulnerable communities that could be affected by this transition? 30 seconds or less, and let me maybe work backwards from the mayor's style.
But in 30 seconds, we are a naturally polluted city because we are in a sort of plateau with the scarcity of wind. 60% of the pollution comes from cars, and we are promoting, let me say, a very good public transport system. We are opening the 5th metro line. In the end of this month, we will open the metro line starting from the city airport. And imagine, from the city airport to the Duomo, it will take 14 minutes with a price of €2.50. So, again, the people understand. And the people can understand that probably we are late. We lost a couple of years with the COVID, but they see. So being very practical.
One example, as many cities, we have participatory budget, part of our budget that citizens can decide. But for past, I don't remember exactly, 3 or 4 years, we have participatory budget, green budget. Of course, this is now green and blue because people can give plenty of ideas, not always big investments, sometimes very, very small in your own area that you can really see very briefly the results.
Thank you. Madam Commissioner, your last word.
In energy sector will mean that we will replace the big thermal power plants with thousands of small producers, and we have to empower our small producers. At the same time, sometimes permitting takes a lot of time, and we have discovered that if you give ownership to the local community, then permitting takes place significantly faster than when they have to negotiate with big companies. So with electricity market design, we will allow also to small producers to share their green energy. And you also asked how we will protect the most vulnerable people. In Europe, we have millions of people who are responding to the question that can you afford normal temperature indoors? And they are saying, no, we cannot. Usually they are living in worst performing buildings. These are not insulated, 40, 50 years old buildings. And they are living in rented apartments. So they are supposed to pay the heating bill, but owner should make investment to renovate this. And this question is not getting smaller over the time. So with energy performance of the buildings directive, we try to incentivize the innovation, and not only for these people who are living there themselves, but also to incentivize so that that owners will upgrade the building stock for rental buildings too.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And this was a very rich conversation. We could go on for hours, but we won't because we're going to have to get out of here. Let me just thank this panel. It was really, really excellent. Let me also thank the other two panels, the conference organizers. Let me just maybe end on the note that the commissioner said about this time on energy, but I think that's probably across the board when it comes to all the subjects that we discussed today, that the European Commission and cities are allies in this process. So I think on that note, let me formally close the conference. Thanks again for Warsaw and the organizers, and see you all next year in Bratislava.
Przystanek Warszawa Stadion.